Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be back, hanging out with you, talking about Mass of the Ages. It's been a few weeks. After the film came out, I took a week off, and then my family had some upcoming travel, so I've been around, and then besides that, I've just been in the dungeon of editing for weeks as well. So, yeah, excited to just have a casual chat with you guys. I have some things prepared I want to say about episode 2, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have. Firstly, so take you back last year in June, we were launching a Kickstarter for Mass of the Ages. And wait, was that 2 years ago? I don't even know. When was that? But we promised that we'd have the Mass of the Ages film in December of 2021, which is in 4 months, a few months. I don't even know what month it is. October, November, December, 3 months. And, but when we screened the film, which was going to be Mass of the Ages, the film, in April, we realized there was so much good stuff, so many good interviews, so much beautiful footage, and so much we needed to say about the Mass of the Ages that we decided to split it up into 3 films. So instead of one film coming out in December of this year, we have the first episode of the trilogy that came out August 15th. And I think everyone watching this film has seen that first episode. A lot of positive feedback from episode 1. I was surprised to see the overwhelmingly positive feedback because it's such a, it can be such a divisive topic. Now, the biggest thing we cut from episode 1 that we wanted to have in episode 2 was the story of how the new Mass came to be. So this was the most shocking thing to me when I studied the liturgy and wanted to find out what is the difference between the old Mass and the new Mass. And a lot of people think, as you know from watching episode 1, that it just comes down to the language, that it's just the same Mass in a different language. Or a lot of people say that, yes, there were a lot of changes, but Vatican II, inaugurated all those changes. Both of those things are false. So when you look into the story, there's an exciting, nuanced story of a lot of twists and turns where there was a concilium put together, so a group of advisors whose job it was to create, or you could say revise or assemble, the new Mass. Now, in history, in like the past, whenever there's a revision to the missal, it's always a revision to that missal. It's never a new missal is just created. It's not like a council creates a new missal. So, St. Gregory the Great revises the missal. He trims the Roman canon. He says Gregorian chant is the language of the Mass. So he's, receiving what's been passed down to him. He's making some modifications and passing it on. Council of Trent, receives what's been passed to them. And Pope St. Pius V, he make certain changes. I don't need to go into it, but basically every time in church history when a council has put their hands on the Mass, they receive it with reverence, and then they make slight modifications. And the later you go in history, the more slight the modifications are. So in the first 500 years, you have the Roman canon developing, the prayers that surround the consecration. And later than that, you have the format of the Mass basically laid out and unchanging. And then in the 1500 to 2000, you have the addition of like saints and feast days. It's very slight modifications. So when Vatican II wanted to revise the Mass, what a lot of people don't know, and this is what episode 2 is going to get into, is that it actually the document on the liturgy comes across as a very conservative document. It does call for some significant changes, but if you were to take a time machine back there and just witness the bishops there assembled, the what you would have sensed is just a great spirit of camaraderie. Like, this is a good idea. Let's do this. Slight modifications. We can all get behind that. And I can get into talking about what modifications would be good for the traditional Latin Mass, but really, that's if there's a problem you're going to pick in the church right now, there's plenty of other problems to pick. Talking about problems with the old Mass and problems with the new Mass, they're problems on different categories. So when the new Mass was assembled, there was a committee that just created it, basically, that were writing prayers that treated the old Mass seemingly with disdain and sought to change almost everything. The extent of the changes are insane, and I think people are going to be shocked to see, here's what Vatican II said, here's what the concilium, the committee, did, and here's the differences between the old Mass and the new Mass. So episode 2, we had an introduction to the Latin Mass in episode 1. We didn't want to get into a lot of the nitty-gritty, but episode 2 is really going to be an exploration of what happened after Vatican II between like 1964 and 1969. And we're taking kind of a different approach with this. So we're going to have, more animation. We're going to have this animation style that's like missal art, and it's going to be very beautiful and stunning. But it's also going to make very complex, complicated things very simple and easy to understand. So again, we want this trilogy to be very accessible to the average Catholic. So you don't have to be a scholar to understand what we're talking about. So with that said, episode 2 is just taking time. It takes a lot of time, and we're not going to rush it. So when is episode 2 coming out? That's one of the questions we get asked a lot. When it's ready. And but I can say that even though we do want it to be the best quality, we're not going to rush art, and we're going to follow the lead of the Holy Spirit. With those things said, I do think we'll be able to release it as a private screening this year. So we released episode 1 to a private audience of about 100 viewers. If you were on our mailing list at theliturgy.org, then you received an email where you could fill out a survey, and we would select basically all across the spectrum of traddiness, traditional mindedness, and we picked all sorts of different people. So 100 people pre-screened episode 1. We're doing a similar thing with episode 2, but what we really want to do is screen it live. So we want to have a screening somewhere in the country, 1 to 3 theaters. And so what I can say is it looks like this year we will be able to have a private screening of episode 2. Now, a lot of people have been asking about our distribution plan for episode 2. Similar to episode 1, we want as many people to see this as possible. So we're going to remove all the barriers there are to watching it. With that said, at first, we're going to want to screen episode 2 in theaters. So once episode 2 is done in the new year, early in the new year, so like leading up to, Lent and Easter, we're going to be showing episode 2 in theaters. And it's going to be like a double screening. So you see episode 1 optimized for the theater experience, intermission, basket or tables of swag. We're working on t-shirts and stuff like that. And then see episode 2 for the first time in theaters. So at first we're going to screen episode 2 in theaters, but eventually it'll be available free online for anyone with an internet connection. So episode 2 will come out next year for the public to see it. And at first it will be a theater screening experience, and then it'll be online for anyone to see it. Episode 3, I'll just briefly touch on episode 3. So episode 3 is really talking about the future of the traditional Latin Mass. Back in May, when we decided to make this a trilogy, I did not know what episode 3 should be about. I mean, there's some avenues you can take it down. But then Pope Francis released his motu proprio. And then that really has been guiding how we're doing episodes 2 and 3. So, there's this misunderstanding out there that the battle is to be fought on the soil of the Second Vatican Council. Whatever you think about the Second Vatican Council, once you see what happened after the council, we can all agree that the reforms went way too far. And that means the motu proprio itself is making these statements that just aren't true about, it's equating Vatican II with the new Mass as if they're one and the same. Once this bombshell drops and we reveal what happened after the council, not for the scholar, but for the average viewer, I think it's going to change the conversation in the church. So then episode 3 is going to be more about the future of the traditional Latin Mass. So there's a lot of questions on what is the Pope's authority? Can he just take away the Mass of the Ages? We're actually having a debate next month with Timothy Gordon and Timothy Flanders, the Timothys, on can the Pope abrogate the Latin Mass? Can he take it away? So that's one of the misunderstandings, or one of the questions I would say. Can the Pope just on his own just write a missal? Can he just take an afternoon and the missal of Pope Francis and make him? What are the limits to his authority, and what does this all mean for the future of the traditional Latin Mass? We're going to Europe in a month to film with a bunch of different people. So the monks of Norcia, the Institute Seminary, Alco and Reed. I don't know if you know these liturgical authors, but they're top-notch, the best liturgy authors alive. Martin Mosebach, we did an interview with him already, in German. Alco and Reed, we're doing some interviews in French, Italian. We're getting a broad perspective for what does the future of the traditional Latin Mass look like, and that's episode 3. Okay, so I hope that was clear. And I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about. So let me look at some questions here. Yes, we interviewed Michael Knowles on Monday. So that was very recently, and it was awesome. We walked into Daily Wire headquarters, and it's just a ton of people working. The atmosphere is really open and bright. We look to our right, and there's this glass room with Jeremy Boring, who's kind of the head there, and Michael Knowles just having a meeting. And we got a tour of the place, and it was so cool. I was already a fan of Michael Knowles. He's my favorite of the Daily Wire heads, and it was just so cool to sit down with him and hear Michael Knowles talk about the traditional Latin Mass. And his interview was amazing. I asked a question. He went on for 5 minutes, giving a very eloquent and insightful answer. So Michael Knowles will be in episodes 2 and 3. So that's one of the new interviews we've grabbed. Tony, so you'd love to hear what kind of feedback we received on the final scene of episode 1. I was nervous that with that cliffhanger, and I got to admit, so when you're making a film, it feels really long. You make an edit, you're zoomed into frames and seconds, and you make an edit, and then you got to ask, well, how does that impact the scene I'm working on? How does that scene impact this 40-minute film? So a 40-minute film doesn't seem that long when you're watching it, but when you're making it, you have to watch it through so many times and iterate and iterate and iterate. So when I watched the live stream and we were all together watching that, it did feel quick for me as well, and I was really nervous that even though it's 37 minutes of content, that once we get to that end screen, there'll be a lot of anger. There probably was, because it kind of set up a cliffhanger. Why do so many Catholics not believe in the real presence? A perfect storm, says Father Jackson, FSSP. And that's really the heart of episode 2. It's not about, it's not about we just like Latin because we're like Latin nerds or scholars or whatever. Everything we do in the liturgy surrounds our love. It should surround our love for the Blessed Sacrament, for God. We are worshiping God and giving him our all. So that's really what it comes down to. So that is really the heart of episode 2. But I think a lot of people, surprisingly, were excited at that cliffhanger and wanted to see what comes next. Like Avila. She's excited. Thanks, Avila. This is a good question. So will the second video just be bashing the new Mass? I think I understand what you mean by the question, because there's a couple ways to take this. I don't think anyone has to be concerned that episode 2 is just going to start with this intense, mysterious music, and we're just talking about all the bad things about the new Mass. That's not helpful. It's not even accurate. So it will not be bashing the new Mass. I mean, I think the most effective way to show people the differences between the Latin Mass and the new Mass, and why the traditional Mass matters so much, is to not go down these roads of conspiracies and getting really dark with it. And it's easy, right? It's easy, low-hanging fruit to just show clown masses and priests riding around on scooters and stuff, and liturgical dancing and stuff like that. That's so easy to say. Obviously, that's bad. But a more nuanced investigation of how the new Mass was created is going to be exactly the thing that changes the conversation around the new Mass. We're not just talking about balloon masses and fill in the blank. We're talking about what happened. We had Vatican II, and it said XYZ, and then we had the new Mass, which just went in insane directions. And there was key players like Annibale Bugnini, Paul VI, who got an agenda through. And then there's many questions we could ask about that. Can the church be wrong with, can the, unchanging church, the indefectible church, give us a less than ideal liturgy? So it's not just about bashing the new Mass, and it depends on what you mean by the new Mass. We can all agree that abuses need to be stopped. We can all agree that, liturgies that are just created by the priest's personality that are very different from parish to parish need to be stopped. We need to have more of a sense of the sacred and the transcendence in the new Mass. But even with that said, just people don't understand the extent of how much was changed. I'm talking about the actual texts, the objective texts themselves. So not how the Mass is abused or this or that, but just look at how much of the prayers were rewritten, why were they rewritten, how the sacredness was removed through different rubrics, that kind of thing. So this isn't about bashing the new Mass or people who attend the new Mass. It's about showing people what really happened. People just don't know. They think the new Mass rolled off the shelf at Vatican II like a product off a factory line. But there was this really important time period of about 5 years where the new Mass was created. And you can say created just because it was the changes were significant. I know many holy priests who celebrate the new Mass, and many holy people who attend, so it's not that easy. Okay. Okay, thanks for all your comments and thanks for watching, guys. Still going through some of these questions. So I don't know if you missed this or if this comment was put after the fact, but for episode 2, we hope to have a private screening this year, 1 to 3 theaters, to gauge audience reaction. It's kind of the final step before you make your last changes after that, to see how an audience actually relates to it. Now, when we screened episode 1, if you guys remember that scene where we just went into, through animation and that kind of thing, went into the differences between the new Mass and the old Mass kind of in a very simple, easily digestible way. That was created after the private screening because we had feedback on, oh, I wish, there was more explanation here and there. And the explanation we had was very brief previously. So a private screening where people can pre-screen the film is very important, and that'll happen for episode 2, hopefully this year. Again, we do not want to rush the process. We're working very hard, though, because I really want this film to be out as soon as possible. But I'm not going to rush art. It's got to be correct. And we're following the lead of the Holy Spirit, as best we can. Yeah, Margo. So Michael Knowles, I already have parts of him edited into episode 2, but he also does go into papal authority and what does the future of the traditional Latin Mass look like. So a lot of exciting stuff. Okay, this is all great. When when you're doing a live show, it's people must be quick at reading comments. I'm really slow. I'm just looking for question marks, and then so if I didn't get your question, make sure you ask it again, so I can be sure to get to it. Okay, there's like a debate happening on papal authority and what Pope Francis said and did in this motu proprio. I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. I don't know what my conclusion is on what are the limits to papal authority. Episode 3 is going to really unpack a lot of those things, and I'm probably going to come down with a conclusion just through making episode 3. But my analogy, as it stands now, is in watching The Return of the King. So you had the steward of Gondor, who was in Minas Tirith. You remember that big white city, who was a steward. So he wasn't the king. He was in place of the king. It's kind of a good analogy for the papacy. And, the true king is Aragorn, obviously. Well, I don't know how many of you know Lord of the Rings, but so the steward of Gondor, when his son Faramir comes home from a battle, I believe it was in Osgiliath, but I don't remember. Faramir informs him that Boromir has died. So steward of Gondor, his 2 sons, one of them has died. His favorite son has died. And then he orders Faramir to go back into a battle he almost certainly will die in. Faramir obeys his father. So this is how I think about whatever is going to happen with the motu proprio, with the Mass, is, and I could be convinced otherwise, because I think we're at a time in church history that's very uncertain. It's like after the Council of Nicaea, you had some definitions that were very strong and seemed to imply maybe a heretical position, like the homoousios. Christ is of the same substance as the Father. Does that mean modalism is true? And there was all these debates, raging around the church. And then we had another council come in and define things further. So what am I saying? So I think we're living at a time that's confusing, and I'm interested to see how the debate goes next month and what my conclusion is once making episode 3. Anyways, Faramir obeys his father and goes into battle. Now, I think as Catholics, we can't so easily, I'm sure there's exceptions, we can't so easily just disobey the Pope because we don't like it. There's arguments to be made for when the Pope is injurious to faith, that we can resist that. But I just don't know where that line is with the liturgy. The popes have revised the liturgy in the past, for good or bad. It's a discipline of the church. It can be ineffective. But I don't think the Pope can just write his own missal overnight and impose it upon the faithful. So I don't know where that line is. I do think, though, that the mark of a saint is not to be smarter than the Pope, but it's to be holy and to obey and to suffer well. I think the saints were marked by a holy obedience, not as doormats to be walked on, but a holy obedience to authority and knowing that God is in control. God can take care of everything in just one fell swoop. He can do whatever he wants. And so I think saints suffer well, and they're humble, and they obey, as much as they might hate what decisions are being done above them. So I don't know. I don't know what the limits to papal authority is in regards to that. So anyways, that's my opinion. Okay, here's a question. When you say that the reforms went too far, does that include the 1969 missal? Thank you. Yes. So what I'm not talking about is that the just personal priest at a personal parish does things that are wacky or too far. I believe that the missal of Paul VI and the Tridentine missal, the Latin Mass, when you just look at them, you realize that the reforms that created the new missal went way too far. So Vatican II, it's in Sacrosanctum Concilium around paragraph 23 or 24, says that no changes are to be done unless they are certainly to be for the good of the faithful. So that is a good principle. And that is the principle that every, pope who put his hands on the liturgy was receive something with reverence and pray that you are making the right decision. Make minimal changes to the liturgy. And so that's a good principle. Like, if we're making any changes, we got to make sure this is genuinely for the good of the faithful. So then when you look at the new missal, a lot of questions come up. Was this genuinely for the good of the faithful? Like, for example, if you just take the orations, so the prayers composed by the church. So these aren't the scripture read at Mass. These are the prayers, like the collect. We pray a beautiful prayer, remembering the saint and asking for intercession, whatever. It's a prayer composed by the church. So those orations, if you were to guess what percentage of them remained untouched in the new Mass, and it's crazy to me to know that only 17% of those prayers made it untouched into the new missal. Now, is that a principle of? Did they follow the principle of don't make any changes unless it's absolutely necessary for the good of the faithful? It doesn't seem so. When you compare the amount of prayers removed, the kinds of readings that were removed, like we don't hear the reading of St. Paul saying if you eat and drink the body unworthily, that you will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord. We don't hear that in the Novus Ordo Mass. They just took it out. So there are so many examples like this of just changes, removing words, removing difficult scriptures, heavily reducing signs of reverence. In the Latin Mass, the priest genuflects before and after each time he touches the Blessed Sacrament. And that was removed. Now there's just a few genuflections. And it's more to do with function, it seems, than meanings of things. So I think it's a good idea that the priest genuflects before and after every time he touches the host. It's not very efficient, but it's meaningful. And so episode 2 is going to be exciting to watch because it's going to unpack these changes. Not like we're just pitting them against each other. It's just this tiresome match between two missiles. It's going to be, I promise you, it's going to be light and accessible, but it's still not going to pull punches. It's going to lay out the facts as they are without going down rabbit trails, and it's going to be fair and balanced. That's our goal for episode 2, and I think you'll come away from it with a lot of insights and surprises. So, Hilda, we have interviewed FSSP priests. Father Jackson was the biggest one, most notable one in episode 1. He'll be, returning. And then SSPX, we do not have any interviews scheduled with them. I would love to do a documentary on the SSPX, but I wouldn't be against interviewing an SSPX priest for episodes 1, 2, or 3, but it just hasn't worked out so far. Okay. Where's episode 2? I know, I feel your pain. It's coming out. We're not going to rush it, but it's going to be hopefully, early next year. The vast majority of people can see it in theaters, and then we're going to release it publicly after that. Everyone can see it. Sam, you say, I'll call you Samuel. I don't know how you go. But it often happens to me that people who go to traditional mass or mess are very conceited and feel better. That makes it difficult for me to get involved. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear a follow-up, just why that's your experience. I've been to a parish where that was also my experience, and it was particularly because we went to donuts and coffee afterwards, and it was like no one wanted to talk to us. It was really weird. But I've been to like a dozen different Latin Mass parishes, and that was 1 out of 12. 11 of the times I actually find the opposite is true. So I'd be interested to hear more about what you think. So many comments. This is great. A great problem to have. Got to maybe sip my drink while I read and give you guys a chance to sip your drinks. Ooh. Interesting question. Do you think showing Mass of the Ages to an atheist would be efficacious? Yeah, I do. I've received feedback from people who don't have a faith and watched the film, and they found themselves just Googling Latin Mass and like watching it. It's interesting because I think the film, see if you guys agree, it does a good job showing the things that really matter, right? When you think about the four last things, especially death and judgment, I think it puts things in perspective universally. So you don't have to be a Catholic to really get that. And then just seeing a beautiful Mass, like a sacred cultish ritual, I think is, I mean, go back millennia upon millennia, we've been doing rituals. And so I think it's embedded into our hearts. So I had seen some good feedback from people who don't even have a faith that have enjoyed it. Jeff, have you seen the results of this survey on this page? Let me see if I can look that up. No, it's going to take too long. Tell me more about it in the comments. I'd have to type it in. For some reason, I can't copy and paste that. Okay. Yeah, so an interesting, I think, misunderstanding people have with the reason Benedict wanted both of the missals side by side celebrated was not because he wanted this kind of platonic like understanding that, oh, they're both equal and let's all get along and hold hands. It was because he had a vision for these missals, like the principle we talked about earlier. The Pope receives the tradition passed on to him, receives it with reverence, and he passes it on. So Benedict is in a place where he's received a liturgy, but he also knows that the Mass of the Ages cannot be altogether forbidden, or shouldn't be at least, and that we've lost the greatest treasure in human history if we've lost this. So he wants them to live side by side, not because of some, that to say that they're both equal or this or that. He saw them both as valid, certainly, but he had a vision of, 500, 1,000 years from now. He wanted the new Mass to be influenced by the old Mass and to have its sacredness reinstated into it. And, over time that could have been the case if this new motu proprio didn't come out. And what's interesting is in the Summorum Pontificum, Benedict XVI's motu proprio that put them, side by side, was that the only changes he proposed to the Latin Mass, kind of, mutual enrichment, they both kind of inform changes in the other. The only change he proposed from the Latin or the new Mass to the Latin Mass was a change of calendar. Like, hey, more saints. Sounds good. It was very minimal. So I think his vision was very much, hey, 500 years from now, or I don't, who knows to put a date on it, but eventually the new Mass would be equally reverent and sacred. So I think that's what Benedict was trying to do. No, don't worry, Renee. You will know when episode 2 is out because we're going to tell everyone and their mother that it's out. And if you're not already subscribed, please go to theliturgy.org, and click Get Notified so that you can be sure you don't miss it in case you're not online or whatever, or we get banned or who knows. Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. I'm going to really try to say this. Petherbridge, Luke. Let me know what that means, please. For someone who recently discovered your work, what inspired you to produce a series on the Tridentine Mass? So originally, it was very simple. I found this beautiful thing called the Traditional Latin Mass, and I'm a filmmaker. And so I wanted to show people about it. I wanted to introduce people to it. I found that a lot of Catholic media at the time, it's changed since then, 5 years ago, when it dealt with the traditional liturgy, it didn't, excuse me, it didn't approach it in a very serious, no, it was serious, but it wasn't beautiful. So I'd watch these things that would just get very studious and wasn't very beautiful. So I wanted to just make a beautiful documentary about the Latin Mass. And then the Pew study came out that revealed that 70% of Catholics don't believe in the real presence. And I saw that we actually have a crisis of faith much deeper than I thought. And I saw a strong connection between the way we worship on Sunday and what we believe. Lex orandi, lex credendi. And so the documentary turned into a very much more important piece, I believe, than just introducing people to the Latin Mass. This is a solid foundation of faith, the Latin Mass is, compared to the seemingly always changing, always evolving new Mass. And then, Pope Francis released Motu Proprio, so this series is just becoming more and more important by the day. So please pray for us. Pray that we can continue to follow the lead of the Holy Spirit. So I love the ordinary form and the extraordinary form. I can feel God and see his love in both forms of rites. So is there any reason to drive a few miles to go to extraordinary form? If you only have to drive a few miles, awesome. That's amazing. You should do that. So I think one of the main, we can certainly get into all the differences between the Old Mass and the New Mass. If you found an ordinary form Mass that has music that is sacred and beautiful and not Protestant and confusing to the faith, if you found a priest that is willing to offer Mass not in a way that's, directed at you or entertaining you, and is directed at God and lifts your soul up to God in that way, I think that's amazing. And I haven't seen that but 3 times in my life. But the other thing I would say is a very beautiful, reverent Novus Ordo Mass. We can get into all the things it's missing objectively in the actual missals. But one very important thing people don't think about very often is the fact that it's infused with options. So many options that you can have a very reverent, holy Novus Ordo Mass done by the books, and you can have a casual, distracting, noisy Novus Ordo Mass done by the books. And you can build up a parish for years and years and years that's beautiful and sacred and holy, Novus Ordo, but then the priest moves. And because there's so many options, and because the abuses to the Mass are so rampant, the fundamental abuse that my heart continues to come back to, and I continue to think about, is the lack of reverence towards the Eucharist. So why don't we use patens? Why aren't we receiving at the altar rail on our tongues? Do we actually believe that Jesus is the Eucharist? That the Eucharist is Jesus? And that every particle is more precious than the universe or our own bodies, our own selves? I have been to so many Novus Ordo Masses in my life, and only 1 out of 1,000 will use a paten, will catch particles. I know from being an altar server that every time I hand that paten to the priest, that he cleans it, and there are particles. I can see them, we catch particles. It happens an average of 1 every communion. If you look at a study that I can go into, 1 out of every communion, we lose Jesus to the floor. Now, Jesus is in heaven. He's not continually getting, battered and stepped on literally right now. But at the Last Supper, when Jesus instituted this sacrament, he looked around to the apostles. He thought about every communion that was to come, every time he would be stepped on. The king being stepped on, vacuumed up. What are we doing? So yes, we can appreciate, I think, both forms of the rite, but I think the main abuse that just gets me riled up is we're not taking care for the Blessed Sacrament. You go to any traditional Latin Mass. I've even been to one that didn't have a server, and the priest holds the paten and, gives you communion. Everything in the rubrics for the Old Mass it surrounds this great, astonishing belief in the real presence. And even reverent, holy, good Novus Ordo Masses, yes, you can find them, but they seem to miss this fact that it's all about Jesus and not about us and our experience. Yeah, I would love to reiterate this. Petherbridge, Luke, thank you again for your comment. So what can you expect in episode 2? Episode 2 is about what happened after Vatican II to assemble the new Mass. There's a lot of twists and turns, a lot of key players. There's some deception and big surprises, but also you can still expect a heart to episode 2. We're not just fighting. Episode 2 really boils down to our love for the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. And we think that the traditional Latin Mass is the solution, is the beginning to the solution to the crisis of faith in the real presence. So episode 2 is about the creation of the new Mass, showing Catholics actually what happened after the Second Vatican Council, and showing them the differences between the two missals. Okay, a lot of questions between yourselves. Thank you for all the comments, guys. This is really, really fun. Good question, Hilda. Anything about Bishop Lefebvre in episode 2 or 3? Would you agree he is the main reason why Latin Mass is still said today? Yes. I think without Archbishop Lefebvre, that it would be difficult to imagine how we'd still have the traditional Latin Mass. Whether or not you agree with what he did, which was to, depending on what side you're on, it seemed like they were just, Lefebvre wanted this society, I'm going to get some details wrong, that could still celebrate the traditional Mass, traditional sacraments, all that. Rome was like, okay, just wait. We'll get to you. Just wait. Push it off another month or two. But regardless, without the approval of Rome then, because he thought, well, they're just waiting for me to die, he ordained one bishop, I don't know, maybe more, and priests to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. So that became the SSPX when Rome really stamped down on it. So God can write straight with crooked lines. And God foresaw this would happen. And it's hard for me to see, looking back, how the Latin Mass would have survived without them. So is he going to be in episodes 2 or 3? So SSPX itself is such a nuanced, detailed topic that I would rather devote a whole Mass of the Ages episode to it, There's so many misconceptions people have about the new Mass and the old Mass and what happened after Vatican II that need to be unpacked first before people can even understand why Lefebvre was such an important figure. I would love to do a documentary on the SSPX itself so we could really go into detail. Episode 3, I could foresee... So episode 2, he'll probably be mentioned in passing. Episode 3, he could have more of a substantial role because we're talking about the future of the Latin Mass, and he was certainly a catalyst for it. What is the title of your films? So we don't really have titles besides episodes 1, 2, or 3. We've thrown around some titles. The main word for episode 1 was discover. That was a word I just had in my mind for how I wanted it to feel. And then episode 2, I like, this sounds very harsh, but I like the title New Order. And that's not a final title. I'm just throwing that out there to the interwebs. Not because we're getting into all these conspiracies, but because that's what Novus Ordo means. It means new order of the Mass. It's objectively what happened. A new order of Mass was created. So we don't really have titles. We might end up titling 2 and 3 just because, so it's not confused with episode 1. JZim, is there any interest of also exploring the divine liturgies of the Eastern rites? Yes. I mean, back in the day when we were doing a traditional liturgy documentary, back when we had this big brand and understanding and focus behind it, we talked about the divine liturgies and wanted to incorporate them in some way. The Mass Ages trilogy is really focused on the traditional Latin Mass and its history and its future. So someday, yeah, I'd love to do that. I think I answered some of these other questions. That's awesome. I'm glad you saw my Valar shirt. If you go back and watch episode 1, those names that are on my shirt are the Valar in the Tolkien mythology of Middle-earth. So awesome. Glad you caught that. One of my favorite shirts. Okay. Some questions that are above my pay grade. So if you have a show idea, maybe we can have a debate in the future. Oh my goodness, so many comments. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for showing up. Yeah, I answered some of these questions about when it's coming out, so just rewind if you're at that point. What is my background? I am... at first, my first professional career, I guess you could say, was as a missionary. So I served with Net Ministries, met my wife there. We would do retreats and youth groups and stuff for young people. We would go into high schools and public high schools. And the goal was to introduce Jesus into the conversation, introduce the Catholic faith, invite them to youth group and all that. So we were like incognito missionaries. My first professional job, 2013, as a video creator for a different nonprofit. And then film director, since then for past several years. And started my own film company 2017. This is my first major feature film, was Mass Ages Episode 1. I've made a lot of films, but first, big feature film. So this is Episode 1 and film 1 of, I hope, many. Oh, Debbie, so thank you for that. So Archbishop Lefebvre ordained 4 bishops. Debbie, you should make that documentary. You're smarter than me. Yeah, Father Ripperger, that would be a great interview. We have reached out to him, and it just didn't work out. I mean, a lot of this stuff is not people... it's not like he refused to be in it. It's more like just timing. I mean, there are so many people to interview, so many locations, so many stories that you really got to see where the Holy Spirit is leading. And that means, okay, Father Ripperger is in this area. Let's reach out. Let's see if there's, good things happening in that area, or maybe he's traveling, and a lot of it just seeing how everything lines up. So, yeah, I would love to have him in episodes 2 or 3. So, Cam, my man, will the third film contain any kind of next steps for those who wish to use the films for helping transform parishes? I think it'll give good testimonials, good examples, but it's not going to be like an instructional video, But what we do want to offer is resources on our website. So we want it to be a hub that people can go to, find the Latin Mass, learn how to celebrate the Latin Mass, learn more about the Latin Mass. So that will be provided, even if it's not in episode 3 explicitly. Single adults who attend the traditional Latin Mass. That's a great idea. Glendy, you should just start that business and call it something. I mean, we are partnered with, what's it called? Bear with me. Catholic Chemistry. So that's a place where you can meet good Catholics. But if you want to start like a trad thing, I know that where you attend Mass is a big sticking point for people dating. So that's a great idea. What should we call it? Anyone have any ideas? Ooh. Every time we get more comments, it like jumps down. But here we go. Jose, are you planning to put your documentaries on DVD format? Yes, we've received a shocking number of requests for DVDs. So we're not going to put out a DVD with every film. What we're going to do is compile it at the end, where you'll have the trilogy, and we can possibly incorporate behind the scenes stuff and maybe I should do director's commentary. That would actually be a fun thing to do on this channel, just to talk through the film. But yeah, DVD of the trilogy will happen. But we got to wait for every film to be out. Spanish subtitles. So the episode 1 has Spanish subtitles now, as of right now, and we have a dedicated team. We have like 20 languages of either people willing to translate for us, or we pay translators. And so yeah, we're trying to get Mass of the Ages to all ages in all locations. Oh my gosh, what a great question. I just can't pronounce your name. Giftith. Hakavixt. That's close enough. How are you today? How am I? I am, there's so much going on with Mass of the Ages. Part of the reason I wanted to come on is because I know I've been quiet from, working on the film to promoting the film and we're planning productions like in Europe and stuff, and DC in the next month. We just came back from Tennessee with Michael Knowles. So there's a lot going on. So honestly, I feel a little bit overwhelmed, excited for the weekend. I'm going on a date with my wife tonight, so I'm pumped about that. Probably play a board game. Doing well, though. I'm filled with hope. I feel really tired and mentally stretched, but I feel also so much hope, because no matter what's going on in the church, wow, God is in control. That's what it all boils down to. So I feel hopeful. Okay, let's see. Oh, Mel Gibson. He might be my favorite director. Yeah, it's interesting because our paths are kind of overlapping. I don't know this for sure, if he's a sedevacantist or not, if he thinks the Pope doesn't have authority today or not. I don't know if that's the case, but I look up to him so much, Mel Gibson. Obviously, The Passion of the Christ, and he's coming out with that new film, The Resurrection, I think it's called. And he's just such an amazing actor. Hacksaw Ridge he directed in the past few years, just amazing. So I would love to work with Mel Gibson. We actually reached out through some of our channels to see if he'd want to be an executive producer, just put his name on Mass of the Ages, but it's just hard to get in touch with him. So, Cameron, can you help me grow a beard? Here's the thing. I could not grow a beard for a long time. And you know what I had to do eventually? I had to spend like 3 weeks not growing a beard until I grew a beard. Does that make sense? So, I spent like a Christmas break just growing a nasty looking beard, and then I found where the beard was. I'm like, well, I don't have beard here, so I'll shave that, and the beard's not coming in there. So that happened. Okay. Good question. I'm glad you asked this. Will those of us who signed up for the original Kickstarter still get our benefits like full interviews? Yes. The reason we're not releasing the full interviews now is because we want control over them. We don't want to just put them out there and let people run wild with them. But we're cataloging them. And eventually, probably on the DVD and probably digitally, you'll have those who support us on the Kickstarter will see the full interviews. So that's exciting. Yeah. Okay, Matt Walsh has a better beard than me. That's true. But I'm in the beard club. I'm like the secretary or something. Oh, thank you for this question. RTF, big fan. Ladmass trilogy. What's next after the trilogy? So we're also eventually, I mean, we're starting pre-production on this right now, but we're making a decalogue, a series of 10 short films on Eucharistic saints. And I don't know if you've heard the story of the Chinese martyr who, when her local church was taken over by the communist government under Mao in 1950s, around there, she sneaks into the church and discovers that the sanctuary is just littered with consecrated hosts, 20 or 30 hosts. And she sneaks in, she kneels in front of the host, spends an hour in adoration, and then bows to the ground and laps up a host, receives a host on her tongue for communion. And then she sneaks back out. And every day she comes back in, 20 or 30 days, sneaks in to this communist-controlled church, abandoned church, and with brave piety receives communion day after day. On the last day, she's discovered, and so her final communion is this heroic stand of virtue and piety, and she's killed. This is the story that inspired Venerable Fulton Sheen to do a daily holy hour, and I was just visiting his body at the shrine last week, and asked him to intercede for the project. So we're making a decalogue of films, short films, called Godbread. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to horselordfilms.com, horselordfilms.com. And then there's some, I can talk about this another time, but there's some horror films. I really love horror, feature-length horror films that I'm developing as well. And more documentaries. I love documentary filmmaking. Okay. Beards. Still more things about beards. Ooh, Juliana. Someone should send messages to Jimmy Fallon. And Jake, while you're growing your beard, why don't you just tweet at him that he should watch it? Because he's a star in it without even knowing. Yeah, there is a documentary that I have not seen yet, but it's on my to-watch list, and I'm excited to see it, about Lefebvre. So thanks for reminding me about that. Okay, a little shout out there, but that's all I'm going to do. That was a really quick shout out, Maggie. Glad you're watching. Okay, I need to wrap it up. Okay, I'll wrap it up with this. Wait, let me say this first. I don't know who that is. Leonardo de Philippis. You know, that sounds familiar, but I don't quite know who that is. Okay. Horror movies. Okay. This would be, I've gone an hour, and that was a lot longer than I thought I would. Horror movies. What defines a good movie? Well, a good movie is correctly illustrates the good. It illustrates truth, goodness, and beauty. You can have beautiful, aesthetically beautiful movies that twist the truth. I think a lot of comedies actually fall into the error of minimizing sin, right? You know, sleeping around and that sort of thing. I think, but what I think about horror is it has, I mean, if you just think of the phrase horror of sin. So in horror films, you know, they're not all good. Obviously, they they can often be lead you into sin through its scenes, sexuality, and that kind of thing. But what's almost across the board about horror films is it deals seriously with sin. You know, there is a monster, there is a consequence to sin, and whereas a lot of comedies and stuff, you know, minimize sin, I think horror films maximize sin. And horror of sin is a virtue that we should pray for. So I also think it kind of, I mean, when your house is possessed in a horror movie, the right thing to do is to call a Catholic priest, right? We know that's a trope. And when they don't call a Catholic priest, things get worse. And it just illustrates Catholic things very well and the truth of things like that, of the death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And I think it does a good job of inspiring in us a horror of sin and gets us to cling to things that are good and beautiful. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We have a debate coming up with the Timothys, Timothy Flanders and Timothy Gordon, on can the Pope abrogate the Latin Mass. Let me just check my calendar because I have it on there so you know when it is. Or my assistant, Jake, will let you know. Okay, so right now it's scheduled for October 12th. It'll be in the afternoon or late morning, I guess, 11 to 12. Wait, is that correct? Save me, Jake. I think that's correct. But it's definitely that week, so it's in 2 weeks. I can definitely 100% say it's in 2 weeks. Definitely in 2 weeks. Margot, thanks for the super chat. Really appreciate that. God bless you. Okay, 11 to 1 p.m., 2 hours, baby. Yes. So 11 to 1 p.m., October 12th. Please join us. It's going to be awesome. Like I said, I'm not 100% settled on what I think about it, but I'm excited to hear both of these really smart men hash it out. All right. Thank you, everyone. God bless you. Stay tuned for more of episode 2. Be patient, but be excited. We're going to do this right. It's going to be awesome. We're going to follow the Holy Spirit wherever he leads. So God bless you guys. Talk next time.